Welcome to the next edition of Grid Forward Chats. I'm Bryce Yonker. Today we have with us two guests coming from the great state of Colorado, Bryan Hannegan from Holy Cross Energy and Mark Gabriel from United Power. Gentlemen, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Bryce.
So, Bryan, why don't I have you go first? Can you introduce yourself? You're president and CEO there at Holy Cross Energy, but maybe you can tell the audience a bit about yourself and what led you to that role.
Sure. Thanks, Bryce. And hi, everybody out there in podcast land. So speaking to you today from Glenwood Springs, Colorado, about 2 hours west of Denver, along the I-70 corridor here in the beautiful mountains of western Colorado. Holy Cross Energy is a member-owned rural electric cooperative. We serve the area in and around Aspen, Glenwood Springs, Vail, so some very nice scenic and resort-y, touristy areas, but more importantly, we serve all the areas, the farms and the ranches in between those wonderful resorts and the service economy that supports people who come here to visit and ski or hunt or fish or do whatever it is that they do when they're in our territory. We've got about 170 employees who are dedicated to safely providing electric power that is affordable and reliable, and as you'll hear probably over the course of the podcast, increasingly sustainable.
Thanks, Bryan. Next up, Mr. Gabriel. Mark, if you can introduce yourself. You're president and CEO there of United Power, but a little bit of the history that brought you there and a little bit about the organization itself.
As you said, I'm Mark Gabriel. I'm the president and CEO of United Power. I always tell folks we don't serve Denver Airport, but if you fly in or out or drive around, we are the utilities surrounding Denver Airport. And with all the growth and fun stuff, we're certainly not as a romantic a place as Dr. Hannegan, but we've got a significantly growing footprint. We've got 115,000 meters, roughly 350,000 members. We're also a rural electric co-op that's not so rural anymore. We're also in a very unique position. We've got about a third of our business comes from oil and gas, about a third from residential, and a third from industrial commercial. I always like to say our growth is due to brilliant management, but in fact, it's an accident of geography. We're the last developable piece of property really north and east of Denver. And so we've got a really diverse mix of members. We also are in a unique position. We've got more than 13,000 solar rooftops, 8,000 EVs, and are dealing with a significant amount of growth. One which is we're handling both with external resources, and also for us a critical component is hyper-localizing our generation and storage.
Maybe I'll ask you a general question, or you can answer it really specifically. Over to you first, Bryan. What's it like to run a utility these days? There's a lot of things on the proverbial plate. How do you prioritize it? How do you decide to tackle any given things on a day, a week, or a month? And then, Mark, you can keep going after Bryan starts.
Well, Bryce, to echo a famous tagline from some commercials when I was growing up as a kid, this ain't your grandpappy's utility anymore. Special bonus points to anybody who gets the popular culture reference in that. It's an automobile, by the way. There are so many good things about being in the electric utility business at this point, and so many opportunities. I would not characterize them as challenges, but so many opportunities. We come from an environment here in the mountains. We have about half the members that Mark has at United, but we have a population that is overwhelmingly concerned about the natural environment. And so the animating force for us over the last few years has been, how can we continue to keep the lights on and keep the rates low and operate our system safely, but do it in a more sustainable way. And by fortune of ambition, innovation, and good timing, we've been able to migrate our power supply from a primarily fossil-based set of resources to something that today is close to about 80% carbon-free. And we have plans that will move that forward going forward into the future. We've also been able to do that in a way which actually reduced our cost of power supply by a considerable amount. And that's allowed us to invest to meet some of the challenges that are out there. How do we deal with more of the electric vehicles and the battery storage and the smart homes and the smart businesses that are connecting into the grid that Mark hinted at in his opening remarks? How do we deal with extreme weather events like wildfire that are more prevalent in the West than they were even a decade ago? Or issues with failing infrastructure that's getting older by the day, and all the challenges that it takes just to keep the wires up and the lines moving. So I think it's a really interesting time. There's a lot of technology opportunity. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of innovation. And the people here, pun fully intended, they come to work energized every day with the challenges and the opportunities that we face in trying to serve the people that we're owned by as an electric cooperative.
As somebody who's been in the business for, I'm almost afraid to say 35 years now, every time I look at the changes that I've been fortunate to have managed to and witnessed, it's all driven by a change at the end of the grid, at the edge of the grid. 35 years ago, I came into the business running electric water heater program with load control, and that was the big buzz. And here we are 35 years later, becoming a DSO, distribution system operator, trying to optimize what we see at the edge of the grid, whether it is somebody plugging in their EV or one of my commercial members deciding they want to put natural gas generation as a backup for their own facilities. So it's I would agree 100% with Bryan. It's not a challenge. I mean, there's just tremendous opportunities, and I am very fortunate that we have growth because that allows you to do things that you can't do if you're sitting in a stagnant situation. And I'm also fortunate that we are a relatively new system. Growth here began at United Power really in 2005. So 20 years hence, we have a lot of our system that is expanded to meet that demand. By the same token, when I came here a little over 4.5 years ago, our focus was a little bit different. In that time, we created our cooperative roadmap, which really laid out the vision for the next 10 years. And a big piece of that vision was changing power suppliers, moving to a whole host of power opportunities, and really engaging the end member in terms of their participation or not in how they deal with their energy future. And for United Power, we're much more of a purplish utility than the super green on one end, because we serve from Boulder County up in our mountain territory all the way to Weld County, which heavy in oil and gas. And yet, ironically, all of those things align pretty well with our roadmap and what we're trying to do. I would agree with Bryan. I wake up every morning, candidly, and I'm excited to come to work. Our folks are fired up. We're doing new and unusual things. In fact, you're fortunate to have probably two of the most forward-thinking cooperatives in the country on this conversation, because we're trying to figure out how to do things differently, how to expand and make sure we have high reliability, good accessibility to power, and to deal with the great future opportunities that there are out there.
Bryce, I'd like to double click on something Mark just said, because the biggest change in the utility space, not just for small and mid-sized utilities, but even the larger ones, is really moving from a mindset of what we would consider to be a hub and spoke type system with large central generators, one-way delivery infrastructure across the transmission and the distribution network, to a passive customer that really wasn't engaging beyond paying the bill and complaining about an outage. That whole paradigm that's governed our industry for over 100 plus years has completely been upended. And technology did it. Technology with a little bit of support from policy, but ultimately technology and consumer preferences, to Mark's point about at the end coming in, that's where all the real change is driving. And it's forcing us to think of our role as much different than even just a decade or two ago, where Mark used the phrase distribution system operator. We're starting to operate our grids to try to balance all the puts and the takes of electricity, knowing that many of those puts of electricity come from generators on someone's rooftop or in someone's garage, not the big giant power plant down the street that frankly was easy to predict and it took a while to build so you could sort of be ready for it. Now we don't know where that next electric vehicle is going to get plugged in. but we do know that we have to be ready to serve it, and not just serve it when it's consuming power, but in a world where vehicles can also provide power to the grid, we've got to treat that like an independent generator as well, a battery on wheels. And so if you start to think about every home, every vehicle, every solar panel, everything connected being this two-way contributor of power, we're operating that common infrastructure that gives all of those the value and the flexibility that they need to work together. And that is a fundamentally different mindset. But honestly, it's like a super challenging and super fun one to try to get right, because it leans heavily on data, on sensing, on visibility, on all sorts of control technology. A lot of things that we've seen in other areas, we can now bring home to the electric sector and create an immense amount of value for both ourselves and our customers.
Yeah, and it's not like a philosophical question, right? This is physics issues. Yeah. This is truly a physics challenge that we have to manage, right? I think about us having to be a network provider, much in the way that we're on technology today, whether it's our phone or iPad or our watch or any one of dozens of technologies. Those are interoperated seamlessly behind the scenes. And I will say, from a strategic and investment perspective, we don't have a choice. When I look at the growth in demand on one side, the decline in central stations on the other, as I've taken to saying, the transmission cavalry is not coming over the hill to save us. We have to figure out how to manage our systems more effectively, which in turn allows the piece that Bryan talked about, which is whoever is out at the edge of that grid, whatever they plug in, we just have to be able to handle it, and we want to handle it. It is an active role that we must take, or we will not have the level of reliability and resilience that society demands.
It's not about providing the energy anymore, because our members are starting to provide that energy. It's about having the capacity to serve. And I think that's really defining a different sort of dialogue, both at the transmission level, but especially at the distribution level. And we see that playing out all around the country in all the different debates of the day.
So my question to keep going on a similar topic would be that you both shared quite a bit about some pretty foundational changes on the supply side of what you're needing to power your communities. And then, Mark, you just got into some of the demand side dynamics. Mark, maybe you can start. What are you all prioritizing as far as what it looks like to get the necessary power to your community from a supply side? And how does the dynamic on the way that you guys are leveraging the demand side, you guys have already kind of gotten into this a little bit, but how does that demand side, more active management look from your perspective?
Well, in the case of United Power, in the last 12 months, I've added 115 megawatts of battery storage. And we have what I know is the largest distributed battery system in Colorado, maybe the country, because we've got batteries at 9 separate substations. Ranging from 8 megawatts to 33 megawatts. And we distributed it across our system for several reasons. First and foremost is I don't like all my eggs in one basket, to use an overused expression. I don't want to put 100 megawatts in one spot. I think there's a physical and cyber risk that exists that way. But more importantly for us, it gives me resilience at the distribution level on specific feeders. So let's say a wealthier portion of our service territory has more solar panels, more EVs, and I've got additional storage on that system specific to that neighborhood. It gives me a lot more freedom of how to actually operate the system. Those of us who came up with the energy efficiency and demand response world, we were always struggling how to make dollars and cents out of it. You can make philosophical sense, but not dollar sense very often when you do the calculations. But I'll give you a specific example. On April 4th of this year, we were able to use our batteries to meet our capacity requirement. Literally up until April 4th, I had to spend roughly $275,000 a month buying reserve capacity on the grid. So that's a cost that we can handle locally. Then when you add into that various businesses and communities that want to be truly engaged, storage is one of the key components. And again, I'll scale it for you. We're roughly a 700 megawatt peak load. and we take a look at 115 megawatts of our own batteries, that really changes the dynamic of system operations. And we've got to continually think how that's going to work. I've been known to say, if I am wrong, United Power will be twice our size by 2030. And if our people are right, we could be 3 to 4x. So we're going to go from roughly 700 megawatts to 1,400 to 2,000 megawatts over the next 10 years. And nobody is building power plants to meet that need. That just doesn't exist right now in the world. And as much as several of us would love to see nuclear, love to see all these new resources, it just can't happen given the time constraints and also the political realities we face.
Bryan, anything you want to add on the kind of the dynamics of how you guys are meeting the supply and blending that in with the demand side?
Yeah, absolutely, Bryce. It's very much about flexing the demand side to meet available supply as much as it is flexing the supply like we've always done, ramping up and ramping down power plants.
Yeah.
And so if you think about consumers already investing their capital in electric vehicles, hot water heaters, battery storage, all of the things, our design principle is to figure out how those investments can be leveraged to create both value to the consumer and value to the cooperative. So a really good example of this is our Power Plus program, where we're helping our members get batteries for their homes or for their businesses by putting together rebates, the monetization by us of the tax incentives, the federal tax credits, creating a capacity payment where we pay a bill credit that lowers the loan payment on the battery from the consumer in exchange for being able to use that battery as a grid resource when the consumer doesn't need it. And then using our balance sheet to provide on-bill financing at a much lower rate than they could get elsewhere in the market. When all that is said and done, today's Holy Cross member can get a set of, not just one, but a set of batteries for their home for $15 additional per month added to their electric bill. A screaming deal that provides energy resilience to the individual consumer, but also provides us with a measure of flexibility that we need to be that distribution grid operator in the future with very high renewables.
You know, we're in an interesting time period. I mean, Bryan and I both share a history with the Electric Power Research Institute, and I remember conversations as far back as 25 years ago where we talked about this idea of how do you control and manage at the edge of the grid so that, quite frankly, it is that the end user member is oblivious to what's going on, right? Because all it is about heat, light, motive power, and a cold beer. But today we finally have technologies that we could only dream about 20 years ago. The combination of communications, control, markets, and understanding of how things actually operate on the system makes it exciting, and it's a future that I think we dreamt of 20 years ago, but we couldn't actually make happen because of the limitations. I mean, think about what happens today. Virtually, the vast majority of homes have internet. The vast majority of homes have some connective device, even if it's just a smartphone. Those are the tools by which we can recombine technology to really change how we operate our systems.
Mark, I'll kick this question over to you. You manage a public power organization, as does Bryan. We don't need to get terribly philosophical, but what does that mean both to you and where do you see public power kind of across the country going? What does it look like to be, directly responsible to the community that you serve?
Well, again, as somebody now who qualifies as an older person in the industry, and I've worked for IOUs, I work with munis, municipal entities and co-ops. The fact that we are beholden to our member owners really changes the dynamic of how we think about the whole system and how we have to operate. We are not beholden to share owners. We are truly in the game of helping our members, and in fact, when we do well, they do well, right? They get capital credits. Mm-hmm. It also allows us to operate much more quickly and make decisions in a timely fashion. We're regulated by our elected board of directors. We've got an electric vehicle charging program. It also ties us tightly to our communities. One of the reasons United Power is focused on hyperlocalization is it also adds to the local tax base. And what do I mean by that? June 1, we'll be opening up a 162 megawatt natural gas facility that is tied to one of our substations where I have 11 megawatts of batteries. What does that result in? That results in additional tax revenues for Weld County, certainly for the state, but for Weld County. So we think about it a little bit differently. We approach it from how do we support our members? How do we manage our system for their benefit? And it gives us, quite frankly, a reason to get up and be excited every morning, because that's our first question. How does this impact our members?
Absolutely. And I know this is a topic relative to serving members, but it's really top of mind for the whole industry. And I think Bryan brought it up in his first remarks. Maybe can we talk a little about resilience and the sort of extreme threats that we're seeing on the grid? Colorado's risks are not unique to many of other locations across the West. So how are you all prioritizing that, Mark?
Well, again, I mentioned our batteries, but resilience is critical. If we learned anything through the sad experience of COVID, is the criticality of high quality, highly reliable electricity, right? Think about it. We moved as a nation, and we certainly moved as communities back into our homes to have to do our business. And for the first time, I think many people realize the critical nature of the electric grid. So for us to plan and properly operate, we've got to understand what are the mechanics, what's the physics behind our system. It means that when we do planning, and it started, well, certainly before I got here, but we've amped it up in the last 4 years. When we see new neighborhoods coming in, we make sure that we put in large enough conductors, large enough transformers, and the right kind of equipment to anticipate what we see in terms of growth, not just in terms of meters, but in terms of the load. I will tell you, I'm sure Bryan shares this concern, capacity in the West is perilously thin and only getting thinner. The closure of coal, for whatever reason, mostly in my perspective, it's from economics, creates a significant challenge and a real threat to society because of the capacity question. Now, how we resolve that, in my belief, it's a blend between what we can do on non-carbon-based resources, as well as some natural gas backup, requires us to think a little bit differently. And it is not just build another plant, build some more transmission, and then serve the needs. First of all, that can't happen. And second of all, I'm not sure we would want that anymore. Much in the way that we've changed how we think about computing and telephony and everything else. I think that's finally coming to electrons. But I do worry until we get a market here in the West, fingers crossed, next April of 2026, we're going to have a really interesting challenge in resilience and reliability for the system.
Reliability is job number one. If we can't safely operate our system and provide reliable service, then it's kind of like the proverbial one thing. You had one job, get it right. No one likes talking about how clean the power is when it's not available. No one likes talking about, how clean the power is if you can't afford it. And no one is interested in how clean the power is if it can't be delivered safely with respect to things like wildfire, or even just, customer members of the public coming into contact with the system. So we prioritize that safety and reliability at every step. And just a couple of ways in which we do that. Number one, and it's simple and we can all do it as utilities, is, as Mark said, understand the physics. Measure, monitor, sense, build your system with multiple redundancies so that when an outage does occur, and it will, there'll be a squirrel or a bird or a tree on a line or something, you have the ability to reroute power just like we reroute traffic when there's an accident on the highway. We've been investing in technologies that allow us to go directly to the location of the fault for quicker restoration, to be able to isolate it and get more people back on more quickly before we even roll the truck and send a crew out into the field. Sometimes we can restore nearly all of the power service without sending a truck forward, which is pretty amazing given the technologies that are out there. And so that helps with keeping the lights on for more people for more often. When those faults do occur, we want to make sure that they're not starting wildfires inadvertently in our system. And the western part of the state is going through an extended period of drought. So we have an extensive wildfire mitigation program that is going through and hardening our system and looking for causes of sparks and other things, repairing and maintaining equipment, flying drones, using thermal sensors, using satellite data to understand where the trees are diseased or dying so that we can cut them before they fall and maintain our rights of way accordingly. So many good technology opportunities to optimize how we keep that system safe and reliable going forward. And then the last piece will be, when we do have outages, these have consequences. We had a wildfire in the Roaring Fork Valley in 2019 where we came one burning pole away from losing a transmission line for weeks. And without that transmission line, there would be no power to clean water, no power to handle waste, no power to keep the telephone service working, the mobile phone and the internet, no power to the first responders, to the emergency operations center, no power to the airport, couldn't get goods in, couldn't get people out. Really bad day at the far end of a mountain canyon. And so that got us to thinking about, well, if we're going to invest in new electricity supply resources, why would we site them 150 miles away if we could do it right here in our own backyard? And so all of our projects that have been sourced for Holy Cross that are of the solar plus battery storage variety are sited within proximate locations in our communities to provide a certain amount of energy resilience, not infinite, but a certain amount, 4, 6, 12 hours, so that our first responders and our local leaders can know that they've got some precious first few hours to execute on their longer term plans, and that we have the power to keep people safe and healthy and in contact with their loved ones exactly at the time when they most need it. On those days where we don't need that power for a black sky type emergency, those resources can become flexible sources of clean electricity right here in our community, pairing the solar with the batteries. So unlike Mark and United, where they put the batteries at the substations, we put the batteries at the solar farm. And what that allows us to do is meter the flow, both up and down, of electricity from the solar panels onto the grid in a way that we can control, that can fill gaps in our portfolio, that can help us meet that balance of supply and demand that we need to meet in all locations and at all times to provide reliable service. So lots of good things, but it's a different mindset. Going back to our earlier conversation, it's about being creative and innovative now and thinking, how can I get 2-for-1, 3-for-1 leverage in terms of the investments that we're making, not just doing the same old thing that we used to do because the world is different. Our member consumers want different. Our realities are different with the threats that we're facing. And our role is different as a kind of a balancer and an optimizer of all the things getting connected to the grid, both supply and demand.
Costly distribution upgrades, frequent extreme weather events, demand surging from an onslaught of distributed energy resources adoption. Do these challenges sound familiar? If so, you need Virtual Peaker's cloud-based distributed energy platform. We're empowering modern utilities with next-generation virtual power plant solutions to maximize the value of DERs. The Virtual Peaker platform unifies all aspects of DER management, from DERMS to customer engagement and demand forecasting. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com.
We're pretty deep into our conversation, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions to you gentlemen. One's on the people power side of this equation. How are you all finding the people that you need to run the systems of the high demand that you're operating now? It's hard to hire the sort of talent that any industry needs, but how is that going, and how important are the skills of the people that are at your companies? Bryan, I'll maybe let you start.
Bryce, that's probably going to be the one thing that I'll be the most proud of once my tenure at Holy Cross is done. It's none of the headlines, they got to 80% renewables and the costs are this or that. It's the culture that we've created. As I mentioned in an earlier comment, the whole nature of this business is changing, and it requires us to be open to innovation and open to new ideas and open to creativity. And when I got here in 2017, the one phrase I heard over and over again was, well, that's the way we've always done it. And that's a mindset that actually is not going to serve you well. And so what we've been able to do is create a more creative and empowered culture here, where we look for people who are subject matter experts in their respective areas. We look for people that have great experience, but we also look for people who are self-starters, who have agency, who solve the problem in front of them, whether it's somebody in front of them in a yard when a lineman is trying to get a job done, or somebody that's at the, on the phone in the call center saying, I can't figure out how to pay my high bill, or a construction partner that we're working with to create something new and novel, like a net zero, all electric, affordable housing complex in one of our jurisdictions. How do we work with our partners? How do we work with our community? How do we work with our customers to solve their problems right in front and have the agency to do so? When you create that culture and your word starts to get out there and people are like, oh my gosh, this is a great place. I get to work with the best tools and the best people, and I get to make things happen. The recruiting challenge actually feeds itself. And you start to create a pipeline of talent where people are knocking on the door saying, hey, I have data analytics capability. Can you help? I have cyber background in another field, but you could use my skills. Can I help? So we've actually had no shortage of talent, and our biggest challenge has been trying to figure out what skills that we are going to need in 5 or 10 years' time so that we can bring those on today and be ready when those challenges arise. That's something that as a leader I look at. What's the role of AI? What's the role of data? How much of our consumer interaction is going to be with the human being versus something else? We prize that human-to-human contact, but does that put us out at a disadvantage? I don't know. So there's a lot of really interesting people questions that good leaders will spend most of their time with. I like to say I spend about half my time just meeting with other employees, making sure that we're all aligned and rowing the boat in the same direction for the benefit of our members and their communities.
Yeah, let me echo what Bryan said. When I first came here, was in the throes of COVID. There was a significant amount of dissension, division. What should we do? How should we handle it? And then, we've moved through that. Lots of heavy lifting on culture, but also through our roadmap, people want to be here. I've changed out my COO, my CFO, a number of key roles, my head of engineering, my VP of power supply, all in the last 4 years. And we have not paid a recruiter one penny. Why? Because people look at the story of what we're doing at United Power, trying to create a new path and really cut a new path that others haven't been able to do. And that's really, it's very empowering for folks. I learned it a long time ago when I first got in the business. I had a CEO who said, my door is always open. And he came to meet me in my office my second day on the job. And I was sort of floored. Here I was some lower level guy. And that stuck with me. And his door was open. And I got quickly promoted to various things because he opened that door, and I try to do that for our folks. I mean, we just had an open position in our member services department. We had 226 applicants, which is just astounding. And that's probably at the one of the lower levels of our positions here. But I've got people calling and sending resumes and wanting to be engaged because they see something different in what we're doing. And Bryan made a great point. I've got people who, my CFO did not come from the utility. He came from a different place in the world, and 2 months in is pumped every single day with what we are trying to do for our members in our community. I will say this, for the first time ever, I've been a CEO now for a dozen years at various places. We are full on linemen, because we changed the culture with our critical people. And what's happened, the linemen are now calling their friends and saying, hey, United Power is a really cool place to work. Look at what they're doing. Look at the opportunities. So it's really kind of a combination of having a vision, setting it forth, and then working with your folks. I wish I could spend 50% of my time with our folks, but I probably spend 35 or 40% of the time. The running joke is I park in the back where the crews park. Why? Not because I couldn't take a spot out front, but because I want to walk through and hear what they're saying and understand what they're saying. And quite frankly, for them to understand what we're trying to do as an organization. It's invigorating. It gives enthusiastic folks. And one last plug I will say is our board of directors has been amazingly supportive. In 4.5 years, we have done things that folks told us we couldn't do, and they've been behind it and given us the runway to really take off. And we couldn't have done that without a supportive board.
So I think we could have ended here because those were great remarks. But I do want to ask somewhat of a proverbial last question. Mark, I'll let you go first, and Bryan, I'll give you the last word. What are you excited about? What are you concerned with? And maybe you can start with concerns so we can end on what you're excited with. What keeps you up at night? What are you really excited about? And it can recap something we've covered, or it can introduce something we haven't yet.
Well, we've touched on a bunch of things, sort of the traditional. I wake up every morning and I look at my phone and I look for 3 things. Number one, is everybody safe? I stress over that. That's my, my nightmare scenarios when one of our employees or members gets hurt. So I always look at safety. I always look, did we keep the lights on? Because we, like many utilities, deal with critters and crashes are the biggest problem we have on our system, quite frankly. And number 3, what is our load the day before? and are we okay? So those are real concerns. I do have broad concerns for the West. I think the hesitancy by some other utilities to join the market is a real drag on where we need to go, because there's a capacity shortage in the Western United States, and that's not going to be made up by people having transmission lines that go to nowhere and by hoarding transmission and keeping the vision that both Bryan and I have for our utilities from happening because we can't interconnect properly. And so that really, those are big concerns. I'm most excited about what we're able to do at the edge of the grid and how we're able to take advantage of what our members want. I mean, I always tell folks, we're supportive of solar. We buy big solar contracts, but I have 2,000 members a year making their own investment with zero incentive from United Power putting solar panels on. I've got industrial and commercial members coming to me asking, how can they work with us on demand response programs? So I'm excited about us being a network provider. As I said, I keep talking about becoming a DSO, distribution system operator, and deploying technologies that I wrote about in a book, back in 2008. And I wake up every morning saying how fortunate I am to be at a place that lets me put in place the dream I had more than 12, 13 years ago.
Great. You're last up, Bryan.
Well, I'm excited about the fact that we are one of the few electric utilities in the country today that is operating with a very high percentage of renewable energy on the system. And we're able to live some of the things in real life now that were being only modeled in laboratories and think tanks years ago. We're starting to see some of that, the opportunity and the challenge appear in our day-to-day existence. Far from being concerned about it, though, I think our team looks at it as kind of a really cool challenge to try to work through. And it's kind of keeping us energized and moving forward as we work towards our board's very ambitious goal of becoming 100% carbon free by the end of the decade, which we don't know how to do yet. But we've got a lot of options and we're exploring them in a very systematic way. And I think that animates the work of a lot of folks here, which is really great. Like Mark, I wake up in the morning asking, is everybody safe? I ask on top of that, not just safe from a working perspective, but did we light anything on fire yesterday? Which being where we are, that is an existential threat. I'm also concerned about preserving everyone's confidentiality of data, and the access to our systems and making sure that we can warrant that we're doing what we can to mitigate cyber and even physical infrastructure risk, because I think it's super, super important to having the integrity to run and deliver all the services that we do. But like Mark, I'm really excited about what possibilities are offered by our ability to manage and influence the behavior of all the devices that are connected to it. And if I had to leave you with one really exciting point, and I can't say why I know this yet, but I feel like there is a tremendous opportunity for in a few years' time, when we look at the developments in the world of AI and algorithms and sensors and controls. We talk a lot about self-driving vehicles. Why not a self-driving electric grid that's super uber reliable and highly clean and super affordable? And, today when we're throwing lots of switches and moving things around, maybe we could be more in kind of an air traffic controller mindset and just watching things, and maybe the voltage is too high and we give a little bit of power here and take a little bit of power there. And it all kind of guides itself. And we get to a brave new world of managing the network, to use Mark's term, in a way that's safer and more reliable and more affordable and cleaner than ever before. That's pretty exciting. I don't know how we'll get there or whether we'll get there, but it certainly seems like a possibility, and that's kind of cool.
The self-optimizing grid. Good. Gentlemen, thanks for being on. Great visions that you're both spearheading at your organizations, and thanks for being involved deeply in our community. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Forum, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.